Welcome, welcome, welcome. If everybody would sort of take their seats. I want to wish everybody a good afternoon and welcome to the House Committee on Natural Resources Black History Month Forum. He's not here yet, but I want to thank our chairman, Raul Grijalva, for his leadership for convening today's panel. I also want to thank our distinguished panelists for sharing their time. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. We cannot thank you enough for sharing your expertise with us, and today we look forward to learning from you. Since its creation 50 years ago, Black History Month has been a time to recognize the remarkable achievements of the African American community and to reflect on the work that remains to be done to ensure equity and inclusion. It is noteworthy that Black History Month this year coincides with the Natural Resources Committee's Climate Change Month. It's acutely important, given the urgency of addressing and mitigating the impacts of climate change, that this forum juxtapose the preservation of Black history and culture with the forceful call for environmental justice and climate action. For generations, African American communities have been foundationally important to the environmental and conservation movements. Black leadership has played a pivotal but often untold role in these movements. People like Captain Charles Young, who was born into slavery but would become the first African American superintendent of a national park. Hattie Carthen, a community activist and environmentalist who was instrumental in leading an urban conservation movement in Brooklyn. And Robert Stanton, who would rise to the highest levels of policymaking as the nation's first African American director of the National Park Service. And African Americans continue to fight to protect communities from environmental degradation. And I'm proud to be part of the team that partners in that fight. As a member of the Natural Resources Committee, we have worked to preserve and protect some of our most sacred spaces. Yesterday, in honor of Black History Month, I introduced the African American Burial Grounds Network Act along with Congresswoman Alma Adams. This legislation will establish a national voluntary network of historic African American cemeteries within the National Park Service. Too often, these historic cemeteries are in dire need of restoration and conservation, and our legislation would provide assistance and financial support for that work. It is critically important that our conservation efforts are inclusive of all Americans' cultural heritage, and that we work to protect historic sites like cemeteries that represent the stories of all Americans. At the same time, we must also ensure that we raise the voices of Black and other minority communities today, because these vulnerable communities are most at risk for the devastating effects of climate change. The National Resources Committee, under the bold and progressive leadership of our chairman, has played a pivotal role in elevating voices of Black communities to ensure the work of Congress is inclusive and reflective of those communities. In fact, our very first full committee hearing on climate change, Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr., president of the Hip Hop Caucus, testified about the importance of moving away from dirty energy and towards sustainable, renewable energy for all communities, but especially for the health and well-being of minority communities. And just last week, Queen Goodwine of the Gullah Geechee Nation spoke about how the nation's rich contributions to African American history are being threatened by sea level rise along the Atlantic coast. It is refreshing that these vital conservation conversations are taking place on the committee, but they are long overdue. I look forward to more conversations and actions to address these injustices on the committee level in my district and here this afternoon. On that note, thank you again to our panelists for joining us and contributing to the dynamic history of Black History Month. Each of you are truly leaders in the environmental and conservation movements. And just to introduce them for a brief moment, we have Alan Spears. He is the Director of Cultural Resources in the Government Affairs Department of the National Parks Conservation Association. He manages the National Parks Community Partners Program, an initiative designed to connect national parks in Boston, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Miami, Los Angeles, and San Francisco more closely to racially and ethnically diverse constituents. After joining the Government Affairs Department, Allen introduced and passed the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Funding Reauthorization Act of 2008. More recently, Allen has co-led or supported 5 successful national monument campaigns, including Fort Monroe, Harriet Tubman, Charles Young, and Pullman. We, of course, also have Mustafa Santiago Ali. He's the Senior Vice President of the Climate and Environmental Justice and Community Revitalization at the Hip Hop Caucus. Mr. Ali joined the Hip Hop Caucus after working 24 years at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. At the EPA, he served as the Assistant Associate Administrator for Environmental Justice and Senior Advisor for Environmental Justice and Community Revitalization. Mustafa elevated environmental justice issues and worked across federal agencies to strengthen environmental justice policies, programs, and initiatives. At the EPA, Mustafa led the Interagency Work Group on Environmental Justice, which was comprised of 17 federal agencies and White House offices focused on implementing holistic strategies to address the issues facing vulnerable communities. And we have Khalid Shahid. Was that good? All right. Thank you, sir. With the National Resources Defense Council. He is the Senior Project Manager for NRDC's Resilient Communities, Healthy People, and Thriving Communities program, where he focuses on the Energy Efficiency for All project, which aims to increase utility-funded energy efficiency programs in the affordable multifamily housing sector. He coordinates with NRDC's affordable housing partners to advocate for efficiency investments in the EPA's Clean Power Plan. As part of the LEED Neighborhood Development Incentive, Mr. Shahid also promotes the expansion of green communities in New Orleans. And finally, I want to note that Mr. Gilbert Campbell of Volt Energy was supposed to join us today, but was called away at the last moment based on pressing personal business. Mr. Campbell has done truly remarkable work advancing our transition to a clean energy economy, and we thank him for his leadership as well. We welcome our panelists' remarks today, and with that,